There comes a moment in the soul's journey when the glittering surface of consensus reality begins to lose its hypnotic hold. Like a dreamer awakening from a collective trance, you find yourself standing at the edge of a vast chasm, the abyss, between who you have been told to be and who you truly are. This is not a gentle awakening, but a thunderclap that shatters the crystalline prison of borrowed identities. The persona that masterfully crafted masks Jung called our social face has served you well in the marketplace of human approval. It has danced the expected dances, spoken the sanctioned words, worn the approved costumes of acceptability. But now, something stirs in the depths of primal current that refuses to be contained by the shallow channels of collective expectation. The mask grows heavy, its painted smile becomes a grimace, and the very foundation upon which your social self was built begins to crack like dried earth in a drought. This descent into authentic depths is not a choice you make with your rational mind. It is an involuntary movement of the soul, as natural and unstoppable as water seeking its own level. The false waters that once reflected your carefully constructed image, those mirrors of social media validation, workplace hierarchies, and relationship dynamics built on pretense suddenly cannot contain the deeper currents stirring beneath. What was once a placid lake becomes a torrential river, carving new channels through the landscape of your being in the alchemical tradition. This moment is known as the nigredo, the blackening, the descent into the prima materia from which all authentic transformation emerges. You are not losing yourself. You are finding yourself beneath the accumulated sediment of others' expectations. Each layer of false identity that falls away is like shedding dead skin, revealing the tender, raw authenticity that has been waiting beneath the collective unconscious. That vast ocean of shared human experience begins to whisper its ancient truths to your individual psyche. You remember, as if awakening from amnesia, that you are not merely a product of your social conditioning, but a unique manifestation of something far more mysterious and profound. The archetypal self, that transcendent organizing principle, Jung, recognized as the true center of the personality, begins to assert its presence, no longer content to remain hidden behind the ego's elaborate theater. This is the first tremor of individuation, the sacred process by which the soul differentiates itself from the collective mass and begins to live from its own center. It is a rebellion, yes, but not the crude rebellion of adolescence that merely reacts against authority. This is the mature rebellion of the soul that has glimpsed its own divinity and refuses to settle for the counterfeit coins of external validation. The shallow people in your orbit begin to sense this shift before you do. Like animals sensing an approaching storm, they feel the atmospheric pressure change around you. Your very presence becomes unsettling to those who have built their entire sense of security on maintaining the delusion that the surface is all there is. They begin to withdraw, to find excuses, to create distance, not from malice, but from a primal fear of depths that might swallow. Their carefully constructed islands of shallow safety. You are becoming dangerous to them, not through any aggressive action, but through the simple fact of your growing authenticity. In the presence of someone descending into their own depths, the shallow person is confronted with the poverty of their own existence, the hollowness of their borrowed dreams, the fragility of their ego-constructed reality. Your journey into depth becomes an unconscious invitation for them to do the same, and invitation they are not ready to accept. As you continue this sacred descent, you discover that authenticity is not a destination, but a way of being, a continuous peeling away of false layers until only the irreducible essence remains. The individuating soul becomes like Cassandra of Troy, gifted with the sight to perceive truths that others cannot bear to witness. You begin to see through the veils of social pretense with startling clarity, observing the intricate choreography of masks dancing with other masks, rarely allowing the authentic face beneath to breathe. This newfound vision transforms you into an unwitting oracle, a mirror that reflects back to others what they desperately wish to keep hidden from themselves. In casual conversations, your presence alone seems to summon confessions. People find themselves sharing deeper truths than they intended, as if your authenticity creates a gravitational field that pulls buried material to the surface. The shallow person experiences this as deeply unsettling, like being seen through X-ray vision that penetrates their carefully constructed facades. Jung understood that we are all carriers of projections, those unconscious contents that we refuse to acknowledge in ourselves and instead see reflected in others. When you begin operating from authentic depths, you become a powerful projection screen for the shadow material that shallow minds work tirelessly to suppress. They see in you their own abandoned dreams, their repressed wildness, their authenticity, and rather than recognize these as reflections of their own disowned parts, they experience you as the source of their discomfort. The truth-bearer archetype awakens within you, not through conscious choice, but as a natural consequence of your deepening relationship with your own unconscious. Like the fool in the tarot, who speaks wisdom disguised as folly, you find yourself articulating uncomfortable realities that others sense but dare not voice. Your words carry the weight of lived experience rather than theoretical knowledge, and this embodied truth creates ripples that disturb the still waters of collective denial. This is the paradox of authentic living. The more genuine you become, the more foreign you appear to those still trapped in personas. Your willingness to acknowledge your own shadows makes others acutely aware of the shadows they refuse to face. Your comfort with uncertainty and complexity becomes a stark contrast to their need for simple answers and black and white thinking. You become living proof that another way of being is possible. And for those not ready to undertake their own journey, this proof feels like an accusation. The shallow person begins to experience your presence as energetically demanding because authenticity requires presence, and presence requires them to momentarily drop their defenses. In your company, their usual strategies of deflection, surface-level conversation, and emotional numbing become transparent and ineffective. They find themselves face to face with depths they have spent their lives avoiding, and the encounter leaves them depleted and seeking easier company, where they can return to the familiar comfort of remaining unconscious. The journey inward demands periods of sacred withdrawal, moments when the soul retreats from the cacophony of collective noise to commune with the deeper wisdom that speaks only in silence. This is not the silence of emptiness, but the pregnant silence of the womb dart, nurturing and alive with possibility. In this hallowed quiet, you begin to hear the whispers of your own authentic voice, so long drowned out by the chorus of external expectations and social obligations. Like the hermit in the tarot, lantern in hand, you discover that solitude is not loneliness, but a return to wholeness. The individuating soul learns to distinguish between the loneliness that comes from separation and the aloneness that comes from integration. In solitude, you are not alone, you are all one, connected to the vast reservoir of wisdom that Jung called the collective unconscious, yet simultaneously rooted in your own unique expression of that universal truth. Discomfort with your own company becomes a profound threat to those who have built their entire sense of self upon external validation and constant social stimulation. The shallow person experiences your ease with solitude as a judgment of their own restless need for distraction and approval. They cannot comprehend how you can sit with yourself in silence without the familiar props of entertainment, gossip, or busyness to fill the void they perceive within themselves. Your intentional withdrawal from superficial social rituals, endless stream of meaningless gatherings, the obligation to respond immediately to every digital ping, the pressure to maintain a constant social media presence, creates a vacuum that disturbs the very foundation of their reality. They interpret your selective engagement as rejection, your thoughtful pauses as coldness, your need for solitude as evidence of your superiority complex or antisocial tendencies. But you have discovered something they fear: to acknowledge that, in silence, the false self begins to dissolve, leaving only what is real and eternal. The persona cannot survive without an audience, and in solitude, all masks become unnecessary. This terrifies those who have forgotten what lies beneath their social faces, who have identified so completely with their public personas that they fear if they stop performing, they will cease to exist altogether. The shallow mind interprets your comfort with silence as a reflection of their own inner poverty. When you are content to sit without filling every moment with chatter, they are confronted with the barrenness of their own internal landscape. Your ability to be present without the need for constant stimulation holds up a mirror to their addiction to noise and distraction, revealing the void they have been running from their entire lives. In the alchemical tradition, this withdrawal is known as the stage of separation, with the necessary separation from collective unconsciousness that must occur before authentic individuation can take place. You are not withdrawing from life, but from the false life. Not from love, but from the parody of love that demands you betray yourself for acceptance. This sacred solitude becomes the crucible in which your authentic self is forged, and its very existence challenges the shallow person's belief that meaning can only be found in the external world of relationships, achievements, and social validation. As your authentic self crystallizes through the alchemy of solitude and truth-bearing, the artificial scaffolding that holds up society's grand illusion begins to appear transparent in your sight. The elaborate hierarchies of status, the desperate accumulation of material symbols, the endless positioning and posturing for social advantage of it reveals itself as a collective agreement to remain unconscious, a mass hypnosis that you can no longer participate in with any genuine conviction. This is the collapse of false hierarchies, not through external revolution, but through internal evolution. The individuating soul recognizes that true worth cannot be measured by the crude instruments of ego consciousness, not by bank accounts or job titles, not by the number of followers or the size of one's house, not by the prestige of one's associations, or the exclusivity of one's possessions. These external markers, once so compelling in their promise of security and significance, now appear as hollow as children's toys in the hands of adults who refuse to grow up. Your indifference to these shallow markers of success becomes an existential threat to those who have mortgaged their souls to acquire them. Like the child in Andersen's fairy tale who dared to speak the truth about the emperor's nakedness. Your very presence exposes the collective delusion that these external achievements constitute a meaningful life. The shallow person, having invested their entire sense of identity in climbing these artificial mountains, experiences your disinterest as an attack on the very foundation of their reality. The ego's house of cards, so carefully constructed over years of striving and competing, begins to tremble when confronted by someone who has found their worth in deeper soil. They cannot understand how you remain unmoved by the carrots and sticks that govern their existence. Your refusal to play the game of comparison and competition threatens the entire system of meaning they have built their lives upon. In Jung's understanding, the ego serves an important function in the first half of life, helps us establish our place in the collective, develop our skills, and create a foundation of worldly competence. But individuation demands that we outgrow this narrow identification with achievement and begin to draw our sense of worth from the self, that transpersonal center that exists beyond the reach of worldly success or failure. This transformation creates what Jung called enantiodromia, the tendency of things to turn into their opposite. What once brought excitement now brings boredom. What once seemed urgent now appears trivial. What once promised fulfillment now reveals itself as fundamentally empty. You find yourself immune to the fever dreams of materialism, not through moral superiority but through psychological maturity. The shallow person, still trapped in the ego's endless hunger for external validation, experiences your contentment as a form of judgment. They project onto you their own secret knowledge that their pursuits are ultimately meaningless, and rather than face this uncomfortable truth, they label you as pretentious, unrealistic, or bitter. Your freedom from their prison becomes proof of their captivity, and they would rather attack the messenger than hear the message. In the crucible of authentic living, pain transforms from enemy to teacher, and the full spectrum of human emotion becomes a sacred alphabet through which the soul learns to read its own deepest truths. This is the alchemy of emotional depth, the ancient art of transmuting the lead of suffering into the gold of wisdom, not by avoiding darkness, but by learning to dance with it as a partner in the greater choreography of becoming. The soul discovers that emotions are not mere psychological, whether to be endured or controlled, but messengers from the unconscious carrying vital intelligence about the nature of reality and the trajectory of growth. Grief becomes a doorway to compassion, anger a signal of violated boundaries, fear a guardian pointing toward what matters most. Each feeling, fully experienced and deeply honored, reveals itself as a facet of the divine speaking through the human experience. This emotional authenticity, the willingness to feel deeply and speak from the heart rather than from the calculating mind, creates an energetic field that shallow minds cannot penetrate or comprehend. Like oil and water, depth and superficiality naturally separate, creating an invisible boundary that protects your sacred space from those who would drain your life force through emotional vampirism or manipulative drama. The shallow person, armored against their own feeling life through elaborate defenses of intellectualization, projection, and numbing, experiences your emotional honesty as destabilizing and dangerous. They have spent their lives learning to manage emotions rather than metabolize them, to control feeling rather than collaborate with it. Your willingness to be vulnerable, to admit uncertainty, to acknowledge the full range of your human experience threatens the brittle fortress they have built against their own inner storms. In the presence of genuine emotional depth, the superficial person's strategies of emotional bypassing become glaringly obvious. Their tendency to rush towards solutions rather than sit with mystery, to offer platitudes rather than presence, to deflect through humor or intellectualization rather than meet feeling with feeling. All of these patterns are exposed as elaborate avoidance mechanisms when contrasted with your capacity for authentic, emotional engagement. Your tears become threatening because they remind them of their own ungrieved losses. Your anger unsettles them because it reflects their own unacknowledged rage at lives unlived. and truths unspoken. Your joy disturbs them because it highlights the chronic depression that underlies their manic pursuit of external stimulation. Your fear makes them uncomfortable because it mirrors their own terror of depth and genuine intimacy. The alchemical tradition understood that the prima material, the raw material of transformations, often found in what we most wish to avoid. The individuating soul learns to approach difficult emotions not as problems to be solved but as mysteries to be explored, not as weaknesses to be overcome but as strengths to be developed. This radical acceptance of the full human experience creates a magnetic field that naturally attracts those ready for their own emotional healing, while repelling those who prefer the anesthesia of shallow living. In the sacred theater of transformation, there comes a moment when the accommodating false self, that masterful shapeshifter, who has spent lifetimes contorting itself into impossible forms to earn love and acceptance, must die. This is not a gentle parsing but a necessary crucifixion of the pleaser archetype, the death of the one who believed that their worth depended upon their ability to make others comfortable at the expense of their own truth. The people pleaser is perhaps the most sophisticated of all personas, having learned to read the subtlest emotional cues and respond with precisely the right words, gestures, and energy to maintain harmony and avoid rejection. This false self becomes an exquisite instrument of accommodation, so finely tuned to others' needs that it loses all connection to its own authentic desires, boundaries, and voice. It is a masterpiece of self-betrayal disguised as virtue, but the individuating soul can no longer sustain this exhausting performance. The authentic self, that transcendent organizing principle Jung recognized as our true center, begins to assert its sovereignty with increasing force. Like a seed splitting open its protective shell to reach toward the light, the real you begins to crack through the carefully constructed facade of endless agreeability and accommodating behavior. This death of the pleaser is experienced as a profound initiation, a passage through the dark night of the soul, where you must choose between the familiar comfort of being loved for who you pretend to be and the terrifying freedom of being authentic, regardless of others' reactions. The choice is ultimately no choice at all, for the soul will no longer tolerate the violence of self-abandonment disguised as kindness. Learning to say, "Number" without explanation becomes a sacred practice, each boundary a small resurrection of your authentic will. You discover that true compassion sometimes requires disappointing others, that real love often demands the courage to be disliked, that genuine service to the world begins with honest service to your own soul's calling. The guilt that once drove you to endless accommodation transforms into a compass pointing toward your own neglected needs and abandoned dreams. This transformation creates a void that manipulative personalities cannot fill with their usual tactics of guilt, obligation, emotional blackmail, or manufactured crisis. The shallow person who has grown accustomed to your endless availability suddenly finds themselves facing an impenetrable boundary, where once there was an open door. Your newfound ability to honor your own needs without apology becomes a mirror reflecting their own patterns of manipulation and emotional dependency. The death of the pleaser archetype is simultaneously an ending and a beginning, the death of the false self and the birth of authentic agency. You learn to give from overflow rather than deficit, to serve from choice rather than compulsion, to love from wholeness rather than neediness. This transformation is so complete that those who knew you only as an accommodating presence can no longer recognize the sovereign being you have become, and they retreat to find easier targets for their unconscious parasitic patterns, like a butterfly emerging from its chrysalis. The awakening mind undergoes a profound metamorphosis that transforms not only what it thinks, but how it thinks. This is the intellectual chrysalis, sacred cocoon of questioning, an exploration where the soul's hunger for truth dissolves the brittle shell of accepted beliefs and inherited assumptions. Within this transformative darkness, a new kind of consciousness is born, one that can no longer be satisfied with the predigested answers and surface-level explanations that once seemed sufficient. The individuating mind begins to probe beneath the veneer of consensus reality, developing an insatiable appetite for the deeper currents that move beneath the obvious. Philosophy becomes not an academic exercise, but a living practice. Psychology transforms from theory into direct experience, and the great mysteries of existence shift from abstract concepts into pressing personal questions that demand authentic engagement rather than intellectual entertainment. This intellectual metamorphosis creates a new language of being, one that speaks in symbols and metaphors, that finds meaning in paradox and wisdom in uncertainty. Your conversations begin to dive beneath the comfortable shallows of weather reports and social gossip, seeking the deeper waters where souls recognize each other through shared wondering rather than shared conclusions. You find yourself drawn to questions that have no final answers, to mysteries that deepen rather than resolve through contemplation. The shallow thinker, still trapped in the binary world of right and wrong, good and bad, us and them, experiences your comfort with complexity as profoundly unsettling. They need their universe to be predictable, their answers to be final, their beliefs to be unquestioned fortifications against the chaos of genuine mystery. Your willingness to hold multiple perspectives simultaneously, to find truth in paradox, to embrace not knowing as a form of wisdom, threatens the very foundations of their rigid mental architecture. In your presence, their habitual patterns of conversation, the endless recycling of opinions borrowed from others, the reflexive judgments that require no genuine thought, the desperate clinging to certainties that have never been truly examined, become transparent in their poverty. They find themselves exposed as intellectual consumers rather than genuine thinkers, repeating rather than reflecting, reacting rather than responding. This intellectual depth creates a natural filter that separates those ready for genuine dialogue from those still addicted to the comfort of mental habits and unexamined assumptions. The shallow mind finds your questions exhausting because they demand presence and authentic engagement, rather than the automatic responses of programmed thinking. They retreat to conversations that require no real thinking, no genuine curiosity, no willingness to have their worldview challenged or expanded. Your intellectual transformation becomes a mirror that reflects their own mental stagnation, their fear of questions that might destabilize their carefully constructed belief systems, their preference for the familiar prison of inherited thoughts over the terrifying freedom of independent thinking. They experience your growing wisdom not as an invitation to their own intellectual awakening, but as a judgment of their mental laziness. And they seek easier company where their unconscious mental patterns can remain undisturbed in the deepest chambers of your being. A profound recognition dawns that your life force is not an unlimited resource to be squandered on every demand, drama, or crisis that presents itself, but a sacred flame that must be tended with the reverence of a temple keeper. This is the reclamation of energetic sovereignty, the moment when the individuating soul learns to distinguish between authentic sharing and unconscious bleeding, between genuine service and energetic martyrdom. Like a master craftsman who has learned to work only with the finest materials, you begin to recognize the difference between relationships that nourish your spirit and those that drain your essence. The shallow person's approach to connection, taking without giving, demanding without reciprocating, consuming without contributing, becomes as obvious to you as parasites under a microscope. You see clearly how they approach relationships as energetic feeding grounds rather than sacred exchanges between sovereign beings. This awakening to your own energetic boundaries transforms you into a fortress of light, impermeable to the vampiric patterns that once left you depleted and confused. You learn to protect your sacred energy, not through aggression or withdrawal, but through the simple recognition that you have the right, indeed, the responsibility to choose where your life force flows. The ancient wisdom traditions understood this principle: what you feed grows stronger, what you starve eventually dies. The energy vampires in your orbit begin to sense this shift before you consciously implement it. They feel the invisible barriers rising around your sacred space, the subtle but unmistakable withdrawal of the unlimited availability they had come to expect. Your presence, once an open well from which they could draw endlessly, becomes a selective spring that offers its gifts only to those who can reciprocate depth and genuine connection. This energetic transformation operates according to natural laws as immutable as gravity. The shallow mind, accustomed to borrowing energy from others rather than generating it from within, finds itself starving in your presence. They experience your self-protection not as healthy boundaries but as inexplicable rejection, not understanding that their habitual patterns of energetic parasitism have become incompatible with your growing awareness that your energy begins to carry a different signature, one that attracts those who vibrate at frequencies of authenticity, creativity, and genuine care, while naturally repelling those who operate from neediness, manipulation, and unconscious taking. You become like a tuning fork that resonates only with instruments pitched to the same key, creating harmony with some while producing discordant noise with others. The shallow person, dependent upon borrowed energy for their very sense of aliveness, experiences your energetic sovereignty as a form of abandonment. They cannot understand how you can be so present with yourself, so complete in your own company, so generous with those who match your depth, yet so unavailable for their familiar patterns of drama and crisis. Your energetic boundaries become a mirror, reflecting their own energy poverty, their inability to generate life force from within, their addiction to the stolen vitality of others. The authentic soul inevitably becomes a quiet revolutionary, not through the crude machinery of political protest or ideological warfare, but through the radical act of living genuinely in a world built upon pretense and collective delusion. This is the sacred rebel's path, a form of revolution so subtle and profound that it threatens the very foundations of consensus reality. Without firing a single shot or raising a single fist, your refusal to participate in the elaborate charades that pass for normal life becomes a form of civil disobedience against the tyranny of the collective unconscious. When you decline to engage in the ritualistic exchanges of meaningless pleasantries, when you refuse to pretend enthusiasm for pursuits that leave your soul empty, when you cannot muster fake excitement for achievements that hold no genuine meaning, you are committing acts of rebellion that strike at the heart of society's unspoken agreements. The shallow person experiences your authenticity as a direct assault on their carefully constructed reality because their entire sense of safety depends upon the maintenance of collective delusions. They need everyone to agree that the emperor's clothes are magnificent, that the hamster wheel of consumption leads somewhere meaningful, that the surface of life is all there is to explore. Your very existence challenges these fundamental assumptions, simply by demonstrating that another way of being is possible. This sacred rebellion operates through presence rather than resistance, through being rather than doing. You become dangerous to the status quo, not through what you oppose, but through what you embody, a living proof that human beings can exist outside the matrix of collective unconsciousness, that the prison doors have always been unlocked. The freedom is not something to be won, but something to be claimed through the courage to be authentically oneself. The individuating soul discovers that the greatest act of revolution is the refusal to betray one's own truth for the comfort of others. Each moment you choose authenticity over accommodation, depth over superficiality, genuine feeling over performed emotion, you are casting a vote for a different kind of world. You become a walking invitation for others to remember who they were before the world told them who they should be. This quiet revolution triggers profound anxiety in those whose psychological survival depends upon maintaining the collective trance. They sense, beneath the level of conscious awareness, that your freedom implies their captivity, that your authenticity highlights their performance, that your depth reveals their shallowness, rather than face the possibility of their own liberation. They often choose to attack the messenger who reminds them of their imprisonment. The sacred Reb learns that transformation spreads not through preaching or convincing, but through simple modeling of what integrated human consciousness looks like. Your refusal to participate in unconscious patterns creates ripples that disturb the still waters of collective sleep, and those who are ready to awaken find themselves drawn to the resonance of your authentic frequency, while those committed to remaining unconscious find your varied presence unbearably challenging to their carefully maintained illusions. In the theater of human interaction, you have unknowingly become a living mirror that reflects back to others the abandoned territories of their own souls, those forgotten landscapes of dreams deferred, authenticity sacrificed, and wild creativity domesticated into acceptable forms. Your very presence becomes a haunting reminder of what they have traded away in their desperate bargain for security, approval, and the illusion of belonging to a world that never truly wanted their authentic selves. This mirroring happens not through your words or actions, but through the simple fact of your being. The shallow person looks at you and sees, reflected in your freedom, the prison they have constructed around their own spirit. In your willingness to disappoint others for the sake of your own truth, they glimpse the countless times they betrayed themselves for the approval of people whose opinions ultimately carried no weight. In your comfort with uncertainty and complexity, they see their own tragic attachment to false certainties and oversimplified answers. The unconscious mind, that vast repository of repressed potential and unlived life, recognizes what the ego desperately tries to deny at levels deeper than conscious thought. They know that you are living the life they abandoned when they chose safety over authenticity, conformity over creativity, the known path over the path with heart. This recognition creates a profound cognitive dissonance that they can neither fully acknowledge nor completely ignore. Their projection onto you becomes a form of externalized self-hatred, a way of attacking in you what they most despise in themselves, not your actual qualities, but their own capacity for those same qualities, their own potential for the very freedom and authenticity they simultaneously crave and fear. They see in your courage their own cowardice, in your depth their own superficiality, in your wholeness their own fragmentation. The tragedy of this dynamic is that your authenticity could serve as an inspiration for their own awakening, a living proof that it is never too late to reclaim abandoned dreams and return to the path of genuine self-expression. But the ego mind, terrified of the death and rebirth that authentic transformation demands, chooses instead to eliminate the messenger rather than receive the message. This is why your presence often triggers such intense reactions in those who have strayed far from their own authentic path. You remind them not of who they are, but of who they once were and could be again, and this reminder is almost unbearable for those who have convinced themselves that their current imprisonment is really freedom, that their conformity is really wisdom, that their emotional numbness is really maturity. The mirror you hold up is not cruel but compassionate, not judgmental but simply honest. It reflects without distortion the reality of what is, and for those ready to see, it offers the possibility of remembering and reclaiming what has been lost. But for those not yet ready for such profound self-confrontation, your very existence becomes a source of existential anxiety that they must either transform or escape.